Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. As always, we have exciting guests on the show, and today is no exception. I'm so pleased to have on the show Kimanzi Constable, who is, Kimanzi, what am I calling you these days? A lifestyle expert, a blogger, a writer, author?
I think the official term is content creator, because then that encompasses like our YouTube channel and the writing, which is the primary goal in my life.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you. Want to hear more about your career journey and how you got to the driver's seat. Succinctly, how would you define your journey to the driver's seat?
Yeah, so I've had a little bit of an interesting journey, and that might just be my own opinion, but I grew up in like a deeply religious home. And when it was revealed that I didn't want to go down the path of being like a pastor, that was like always what my life ambition was set to. My parents did not respond to that well, and they actually kicked me out at 17. Wow. And at 17, I was living in the Pacific Garden homeless shelter in Chicago. And I was there for a year trying to like start my adult life in a homeless shelter. So I quit school. I eventually got my GED like years later, but I quit high school. I was working at Target and Walmart and Burger King and all these jobs that I could get at that age to survive. I eventually did save up enough money to get my own place. And when I did get out of the homeless shelter, got my own place, my first official job, if you will, was at Pepsi. I got my CDL and I was driving trucks for Pepsi. And I went from barely making it to making $100,000 a year. And this was in 1999. So like, that was a lot of money back then. Like it was a lot of money. And then from there, it kind of transitioned to, I went to Frito-Lay, I went to Sara Lee. And then eventually I had the opportunity to start my first business, which was a vacation relief service for independent vendors. That's a whole nother story.
You have many lives.
Grew to $500,000 a year. I did that for 12 years. Yeah. And this was in like the 2000s, so like $500,000 then was a lot of money. But I didn't have any influences in my life that taught me about entrepreneurship. So I mismanaged the business. I sold it in 2012 and I started doing what I do now, which is kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, it's an online business. And I've been doing that since 2012.
Wow. So that's quite a story. What was going through your head? How did you decide, you know what, I am not going to fail no matter what? And you pivoted that to, like you said, I don't know if you said $250,000 or $500,000, but to a very successful business that you sold.
Yeah. So for me, somebody told me while I was at the homeless shelter, it was somebody who was, you would call him a working poor. He was in his 30s. He had a decent job, but just not decent enough to pay for life. So he had to, stay in a homeless shelter. He's working poor. And the one thing he told me is like, there's something you need to understand in life. He's like, don't fake it till you make it. Just make it. He's like, you have no choice but to make it. And that really it stuck with me my whole life. Like there is no failure is not an option. Like it's just not an option. I'm just going to make it no matter what. And it's just a matter of figuring out what does make it mean.
So what would you say are the key ingredients to successfully owning your career?
I think you have to have clarity. I feel like a lot of my journey, there's been a lack of clarity, which is you and I talked off camera about the pivots that I've made. Like I've made a lot of pivots, and I think it's because I just did not have clarity on what does owning my career mean. Meaning, what am I working towards? And
Mm,
so that meant a lot of pivots. I think the one thing you have to have is how, what do you want to do with your time? Do you want a tech job? Do you want a remote job? Do you want to go into an office? Do you want a business? I think clarity is the key. And unfortunately in life, clarity is not an easy situation. Like sometimes it takes trial and error. But the one thing that I love about the time that we live in right now in 2022, so if you're listening to the future, I don't know what it's going to look like for y'all, but for us, there's been a shift, right? Like you can be a remote worker, you can be a contract worker to a company now where you get paid well, but you're not technically an employee of the company. You can have a great career within companies because there's a lot of people that have quit their jobs and it's opened up a lot of opportunities. So I think it's an exciting time for workers and for entrepreneurs and all of us, but you need clarity on what exactly it is that you want to do. And at this point, when you ask me how to identify, I said content creator because I have clarity. My ultimate goal is to get paid to write articles for publications, and it's to grow our YouTube channel to the point that it brings in AdSense and brand sponsorships. We have a program now that Simone knows about called Publish and Paid, where we teach people how to do what we do. But in 5 years, I don't want to be doing that. That's not
mhm.
my long-term goal. I don't want to sell anything on the internet. I would just rather be a creator, and then all that money that's coming in from us creating and write these articles and all that, put it into investments like real estate and stocks and all that stuff to set up our retirement because I don't want to do this forever.
Mm. Talk to us, Kimanzi, about getting to clarity. What are some of the steps that you took other than the trial and error? I get that because sure, you got to try it to see if you like it or not, and then take it off the plate. What are some of the other things that you did to really get crystal clear of that vision that you just shared with us?
I had to really sit down and I had to think about what do I enjoy? What do I not enjoy? But the biggest piece of the equation was what is it that I want to do that comes directly from me and not programming? I feel
Mm,
like for a lot of people, there's a lot of program. The American dream is programming. It's the corner office and the white picket fence and the big house and the car and this and that, and it's all a status
mhm.
symbol. And the reality is, the American dream is just consumerism that's designed by the companies that are trying to sell you all the stuff. So, so I think clarity is getting past all of that programming, getting past your parental programming. My parents wanted me to be a pastor. Your parents might want you to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. I don't know. And
Mm,
that programming is deep in your head because they drilled it in you on all your informative years. So I think that clarity starts with what was put into my mind as far as what I should do and what do I actually want to do. Maybe I want to be a painter. Maybe my son was going to college because he thought he wanted to be a policeman, and he transitioned and he's like, I like working with my hands. So he went into an apprenticeship where he's going to be a plumber.
mm.
And I'm like, are you sure that's what you want to do? And he's like, that's what I want to do. And I'm like, well, bravo to you for getting that clarity right now. So it's like, to have clarity, you have to figure out what is it that you want to do, that comes from you, that lights you up, that brings you joy, and then start to create that path to get there. Because with the clarity, you can figure out the path. We have Google, we have so many tools that are available to us now, but you have to have that clarity first.
Mm, I love that. Get clear in your career. So, okay, now that you've gotten clear, what's next for you?
Now it's doing that nitty gritty grinding work to get to that ultimate goal. And so for us, for example, we want to be content creators. So we want to build a big YouTube channel. We want to write articles for publication. I'm writing 8 to 12 articles a week now for publications. And Simone writes for Forbes. So I know she's like, what?
Man, that would meet my Forbes goal. That would be, I mean, and plus, that's awesome.
but it also means we have to film, and almost sometimes more than we want to film. We don't live anywhere. We sold a lot. For those of you that listen to this and don't know our story, we sold all of our stuff last year. We travel full time. We just got back from 3 months in Europe. Well, people want to see what that lifestyle looks like. They want to see what it's like to be in Nice, France right now. What's it like to have to deal with customs and crazy situations. Like that's all the stuff we film, we put on our YouTube channel, and that's what people are like, "Ooh, I want to tune into this." It's kind of like a little show. So the nitty gritty work means a lot of filming. Like even when we don't feel like it, sometimes it means those videos have to be edited. It means they have to be promoted. It's all the nitty gritty work to get us to the path. Now, if my goal was something else, like for a long time from 2014 to 2018-ish, before the or 19-ish, before the pandemic started, I did a lot of corporate consulting. I think I did like 50 gigs during that time, which meant a lot of spending time in corporations and traveling. And that's what I thought I wanted to do with my life. And that was work. It's work preparing for the presentation. It's work making sure you're delivering exceptional results for these companies. It's work negotiating back and forth. But with that clarity, you gotta hit the ground and do the nitty gritty work.
Mm. What would you say to someone contemplating something more for their career about risk? Because you have to be able to have an appreciation for taking risk in your career. So what would you say to that person? Or tell us about risk and how you look at it and how you can use it as a tool in your career.
Yeah, so there's a lot of risk, especially if you're going to transition maybe to entrepreneurship, or you're going to try to take a contract position. There's a lot of risk there. But I think the biggest thing to understand is risk. The idea of taking a risk is a fallacy in general, because people think that if you're at a company and you've been working there 20 years, you're safe. Well, the last couple of years have showed us you're not safe. Nobody's safe, right? Nobody's safe. And so I think it's important to understand that risk is not a concept in the way that we think it is. Everybody has risk. Whether you're a long-time career employee, whether you're starting entrepreneurship, there's going to be a risk. Now, those risk levels might be different, but there's risk there. And the best thing that you can do is prepare yourself for risk. So like practical things like having emergency fund, right? Like having a little bit of a plan B, those things could kind of mitigate risk. But if you let risk keep you from pursuing another path, you're not going to get very far in life.
I love that. I love that. So if you had to think about your career body of work and, your different experiences, what would you name the title of your book that talks about your career body of work?
For me, I was thinking about this. It might be something like The Vagabond Life. It might be something like I think probably more accurate is The Intentional Life. I really like that word, intentional. And I feel like a lot of what we do in life is not intentional. A lot of it is we're just going with whatever the flow is. We're just going with whatever the programming is. And we're not intentional about what is it that we want to do. And so I think for me, the book would be The Intentional Life, getting past societal programming and the things that you think you should do, and figuring out a life that's full of only the things that you want to do.
Yeah, Kimanzi, that's easier said than done. I'm thinking about
a lot easier said than done.
reprogramming, because you hit it and the nail on the head about parental programming and how to undo that. And now I'm thinking about myself as a parent and how I'm wiring my daughter as well, to just hold up a mirror with that.
Yeah, I think the best thing that a parent can do is teach their children like individualism. Like, you want to guide them, on the path. I think parents are there to kind of be a sounding board for children, and really not try to instill, like, especially for people of color, like a lot of generational trauma is associated with us, and you kind of don't want to pass that down. And so it's a hard balance between, you have to let them find their path. You have to let them kind of get hurt a little bit every now and then, but you also want a better life for them than you've had for yourself. So it's like it's a hard balance. But I think the best thing is to teach them to be the best version of them and whatever that means.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also get them therapy.
To undo the harm you've done.
To undo the harm that your parents did to you and my parents did to me.
Yeah. Can you tell us about some of the resources that have been helpful to you along your career journey to leveling up?
I still to this day work with a therapist / life coach. Every other week we meet and kind of go over things, and that's been a godsend. I also read a lot of books, as a lot of people do. One that I would highly recommend is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I just feel like it's like such, no matter what you want to do in life, you want to be a great leader, you want to be a great entrepreneur, you want to be a great human, the concepts that he's talking about in this book to create the habits that helps you get there is critically important. So I think that one, and then there's another book by a man named Dan Miller called 48 Days to the Work You Love. And he's talking about this concept of not you're going to get your dream job in 48 days, but getting your mindset to the place where you could even figure out what's your dream job, what's your dream career, what's your dream business. He's talking about concepts in there that will help you get there, and it will help you start to figure out what makes sense for you. And so I think those two books are incredible resources. I think everybody should have therapy. It's absolutely necessary. And as far as other things like life coaches and stuff like that, I think you kind of have to walk a fine line because there's a lot of murky waters when it comes to that. People that are giving themselves moniker but don't have the training, and that could really harm you. But I think it's figuring out who's the good group of professionals that you can go to. What's the good group of books, podcast, listening to Simone's podcast, listening to other podcasts. It's easy, right? Like you're walking to go wherever you're going to go and you can listen to a podcast. You're driving, you can listen to a podcast versus kind of filling your mind with like the filler junk that's out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Please listen to my podcast as well as go and check out Kimanzi, the Constables on YouTube as well to support them. Well, Kimanzi, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. It's short and sweet. Can you tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you if they'd like to do so?
You can find me at kconstable.com. That's KCONSTABLE. You can find links there to all the social media, and you'll also find some great content there.
All right. Well, thank you for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.